All right, everyone, we got 6:30 the time, and we're gonna go ahead and get started. Tonight's meeting is for Sunnyside City Council regular meeting for Monday, May 11th, 2020. The time is now 6:30 p.m. And this is the city's third city council meeting held via online conferencing application. All city council members and city staff are participating from remote locations. All council votes will be taken by roll call vote, and the members of the public can watch our meeting on YouTube, Zoom, or city website. Council members, we have to make sure that only one person is speaking at a time. I will call on every member to make sure you have had an opportunity to speak. I will now ask the City Clerk Renteria to start our roll call.
Okay, I have Mayor Guerrero.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Stremler.
Here.
Councillor Farmer. Councillor Farmer.
Here.
Councillor Henry. Councillor Henry.
Councilor Henry said he was going to be joining us a little bit late, that he was on the road and might be joining us around 6:45 or 7.
Okay. Councillor Restucci.
Here.
Councillor Hicks.
Here.
Councillor Broersma.
I'm here.
City Manager Casey.
Here.
Finance Director Alba. Here. Fire Chief Anderson.
Here.
Police Chief Escalera.
Here.
Public Works Director Fisher.
Here.
And I am here. Okay, Mayor.
Thank you. So once Council Member John Henry add him to our roll call of people who attended the meeting today. First, we have our public comments report. Pursuant to Governor's proclamation related to suspending certain provisions of the Open Public Meeting Act during the COVID-19 pandemic, no in-person public comments will be accepted. Residents were asked to submit written comments in advance via email. Council may refer items to staff to review and/or research for presentation at a future council meeting. Mr. City Manager, was there any public comments?
So we have no report at this time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, without any public comments, we'll move on to our consent agenda, which we have our minutes for the April 27th, 2020 regular meeting, approval of vouchers numbers 118734 through 118753, and wire transfers as listed for $597,926.12 for the period ending on April 24th, 2020. Approved claim vouchers, vouchers numbers 98970 through 99025, and wire transfers as listed for $353,000.9798, and for the period ending on April 22nd, 2020. Vouchers numbers 99026 through 99059, and wire transfers as listed for $132,214.38 for the period ending on April 29th, 2020. Voucher numbers 99060 through 99102, and wire transfers as listed for $116,312.92 for the period ending on May 6th, 2020. Is there, I guess I will ask each individual council members any questions or anything you guys want to pull from the consent agenda. And we'll start with Deputy Mayor Stremler.
No questions.
Council.
I have.
Councilor Farmer, no questions?
There's something wrong here. I'm muted and unmuted, muted and unmuted. I have no questions.
Thank you.
I had the same thing. I was muted and then all of a sudden it was unmuted again.
Okay. We'll keep an eye on that, see if it keeps on doing that.
This is Jackie. I was getting some feedback from some of the members. So what I did was I muted everybody. So everybody is all unmuted. And then if you could just mute yourself on your end.
Thank you, Jackie. Councillor Restucci,
No questions, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hicks,
No questions.
Councillor Broersma.
I have no questions.
Okay, having no questions or anything pulled, what is the desire of council on this item?
Mr. Mayor, I would move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion by Councilmember Restucci, second by Councilmember Broersma to approve the consent agenda as presented. Is there any debate on this item? Okay, hearing no debate, the city clerk will now start the roll call vote.
Mayor Guerrero,
Yes?
Deputy Mayor Stremler,
Yes.
Councillor Farmer,
Yes.
Councillor Henry. Oh, sorry. Councillor Restucci,
Yes.
Councillor Hicks,
Yes.
Councillor Broersma.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes.
Motion passes, thank you. Up next, we have our active agenda. And the first item is a 2020 Cinco de Mayo Festival Contract Amendment. Consider authorizing the city manager to execute a contract amendment with A&A Promotions to allow for reimbursement of non-recoverable operational expenses incurred prior to the date of notice of termination. Mr. City Manager, can you please give us a report?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Council will recall that in October of last year, following council approval, the city entered into a contractual agreement for $28,500 with A&A Promotions to promote and operate the city's 2020 Cinco de Mayo Festival. And pursuant to that contract, A&A Promotions went forth in good faith to secure commitments and agreements with various advertisers, vendors, performers, and a carnival organization. As the COVID-19 pandemic emerged and by mid-March had quickly become apparent was going to be not something we were going to be able to work around for an event that brings nearly 25,000 people to Sunnyside. Councilor Broersma, on behalf of LTAC, and I met with public health officials and with A&A Promotions. And coming out of those discussions, we made the very difficult decision to cancel our event for 2020 based on the health district's advice. This was a completely unforeseeable circumstance entirely outside of A&A's control. However, by that point, A&A had incurred certain obligations that it could not obtain refunds for. And in that discussion, we had discussed, of course, with them, not holding against them that they had moved forward in good faith, and we would look at being able to reimburse them for eligible expenses. However, upon further review of the city's boilerplate contract, it was found that it was very restrictive and limited only to reimbursement of advertising expenses that had already been incurred. And in looking at that situation, we were asked to take a look at a legal avenue for potentially amending the contract to enable A&A to be compensated for other expenses and deposits that it had made that it could not get refunded. So our city attorney reviewed the contract and came up with the amendment that is before you this evening, and would encourage the council's consideration.
Okay, and I will ask each council member for their comments or questions, and we'll start with Deputy Mayor Stremler.
I have some questions. How much have they spent on advertising, and of the $28,500 that was approved, how much have they been given of that? How much of that has been spent? Where are we at on that? I guess I want to know exactly what's happening with that money, where it is and stuff.
Certainly. I'll invite Clerk Renteria. She has been working with A&A on the reimbursements to date, and had the information on the advertising reimbursements that had already been submitted.
Okay, so what we have already paid them so far is $2,700, $2,723. What they're seeking to get reimbursed for the rest for deposits and for the bands and some materials that they've purchased for the event is $20,828. So in total, they would be receiving $23,551. They were awarded $28,500.
I guess so. The question is, of that 28,500, there'd be about 5,500 left then, correct? In the city coffers.
Yes, that would presumably go back to the lodging tax fund for potential consideration and disbursement by the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee. Their financial model, or ANA Promotions financial model, is to as much of the revenue that they obtain from the event to cover the overall expenses of the event, they generate during the event itself. And so the city money is what enables them to stage and prepare for the event, and most of the costs associated with it do tend to be incurred in advance of before the event occurs.
Okay. Right, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Farmer.
Couple of questions. It says that the city will be apprised of the expenditures or made aware of what was spent. I, as a councilman, have no idea where this money went, and I would assume that I would be part of the city. I know on any other or on most other expenditures of the city through the departments and stuff, boy, it lists whether it's a hammer or whatever. I want to see those expenditures so I know what they are for. I believe that we need to, and I don't want to hang them out to dry, but they are just like any other business in this town, struggling because of this. And so if we pay them all of their costs, what about the shops that are not able to be open? They're having to eat that themselves. I just it's a double-edged sword there, and I don't know really which way to go. I appreciate the work A&A does, but on the other hand, there's lots of businesses in this town that aren't even going to survive this, and here we are paying everything.
So, Councilor
That
Farmer,
would be my comment.
Oh,
Councilor Farmer, did you want to get a breakdown of the expenses that A&A incurred?
I want a breakdown of all the expenses they incurred. That is correct.
Okay. Mr. City Manager, can you make that happen for Mr. Farmer?
certainly.
Okay.
And if I might add, it's my understanding, and my knowledge of this is admittedly limited since I only went through this cycle of event reimbursement in 1 year. In the past, since this was a function of the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee, they make their recommendation to council, council approves the contracts, and then the oversight essentially goes back to the LTAC and the city clerk as staff to the LTAC to provide that oversight and receive and then process the reimbursements. These are not expenses that, to my knowledge, have come back to council for review. Not that that can't happen, just I don't think that's been the practice. And I certainly welcome if there's others who have more knowledge or history on how that's been administered in the past.
Mr. City Manager, I don't care how we've done it in the past. This is money that the city is spending. It may be not raised from our own taxes, but it's money that we are stewards of. And I think to do due diligence, I think every council member needs to know exactly the dollars that was spent and where it's going.
I think Jackie has on the screen, for those of you can see, what the expenses are. Jack, can you go through those expenses to see if that might help?
I am not on a computer and I have no screen.
Okay, and we'll have Jackie go through those. That way you guys are aware of where it is that she is looking at.
Okay, so we're doing the first one is pageant sashes. She paid $85.50. The next one is crowns, $142.50. An audio deposit of payment of $4,600. Stage deposit and payment of $1,000. Advertising was $2,723, which has already been paid. And then 2 band deposits, one of $10,000 and another of $5,000. And I did review the contracts, and they do say that they are non-refundable only if the date was rescheduled. So the money isn't refundable. They're only able to reschedule for a total of $23,551.
Councilman Farmer, do you want that in an email format so you can review it for future discussion?
Yes.
Okay, we'll have our city clerk send it over to all of us. That way we have it as a reference point when we keep on discussing this item. Any other questions, Council Farmer?
So it looks to me like most of this money that we're asked to approve tonight will be for deposit of the bands. And what about rescheduling them for next year? Is there a time date that we have to meet in order for the reschedule, or can we just reschedule them for next year?
So with Cinco de Mayo, we do a request for proposals. So it's not guaranteed that A&A will be awarded that event. So it's not for sure. It's kind of like we go to bid, like, hey, somebody who wants to.
I understand that, but if I hate to flush $15,000 right down the toilet, which is exactly what we're being asked to do right now.
Mm-hmm. The contract does say that it can be rescheduled. It doesn't have a expiration date, I would say. So It's probably something that could be done if she is awarded Cinco de Mayo next year.
How many proposals do we have to run Cinco de Mayo every year?
Typically just her, but there has been there was a year where there were 3 applicants, I believe. I'd have to go back and look at the record, but in these last 2 years, she's been the only one that has applied.
Okay.
Okay, Council.
Well, my opinion right now is I'm not ready to make that decision. I think there's some questions that need to be answered, and I'm not ready to make this decision tonight. And I guess that's all I have for right now.
Thank you. Councilmember Restucci. I think you're muted, Councilor.
Thank you, sir. Sorry about that. I double muted. In light of the discussion that's happened, I think I'm going to hold my questions, Mr. Mayor, and wait for more information.
Thank you. Councilor Hicks.
I'm kind of in the frame with Councilor Restucci there. There's a few questions, but more information to handle those.
Okay, Councilor Boersma.
Yeah, so I had the privilege of being in the meeting with the city manager and folks from A&A Productions. So I have a slightly different perspective on it. However, hearing Mr. Farmer's questions and also some of the comments of the other council members, I agree that my position is going to be a little bit different. And I think that the rest of council should maybe be able to get some further information, some more numbers. I certainly don't want to, unnecessarily negatively impact A&A Productions. They do a good job for us every year that they've been doing this, and they're out a lot of money out of pocket. And I understand Mr. Farmer's sentiments on that we need to be careful how we're spending our money, but At the same time, I want to be able to show mercy where we can show mercy. So if we can get some more numbers to all of us as council members, and we can maybe all together make a little bit more of a informed decision on this, I think that'd be a great idea.
Thank you. And I guess just a question for maybe our city manager, maybe Jackie might know the answer to this, but well, LTAC, the use of those funds are meant for obviously attracting business to the community, but since this is not going to attract any business, is this even an allowable reimbursement since we are not technically bringing in any visitors from outside of the community?
We had discussions about the contract and the issue of the cancellation of the event with the city attorney. Because the event and the award of the contract and the actions taken in execution of the contract by the awarded vendor, A&A Promotions, were all undertaken in good faith based on the presumption that the event would go forward, they were and remain allowable expenses. The fact that an external event, unforeseen and unexpected, forced the cancellation of it, does not negate the underlying expenses or their validity under the contract.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like the consensus is we need more information, and obviously Councilor Farmer has some very valid points as far as being able to reschedule and potentially re-awarding, next year's contract to A&A Promotions. Again, this is going to be funds that they're going to be out potentially for over a year, and I'm not sure, like every other business in town, they're going to be in a pretty tight position, since this might be one of the biggest events that they put together. But it sounds like the consensus of council is that we need to get more information before we make a decision on this amendment. Is that what I'm hearing from everybody?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes,
Mr. Mayor?
Council Farmer, yes.
This is Mike Farmer again. Hey, in no way do I want to demean A&A Promotions. I think they are a stand-up group, and I just think that we need to be sure of what we're doing before we do it.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. City Manager.
Mr. Mayor,
Can anyone hear me? This is John Henry.
John. Okay, you joined us already. Thank you.
I've actually been here for a little while. I just finished up catching up there on exactly what we're reading about the AA Promotions and the COVID situation, and I'd just like to weigh in saying that I would personally like to make a motion to have the manager execute a contract, because that contract will become forward for council to review and to vote on, correct?
Right. This is the amendment that we are going to be voting on, and that's what you're making a motion. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not yet, but I was planning on it because what we're asking him to do is come up with the numbers for us, and that will also bring forward if we're going to pass it or not. So I'd like to make the motion to have the city manager execute contract.
Mr. Mayor,
point of clarification.
Let's have Councilor Restucci. I think he was first to ask for his voice to be heard. Mr. Restucci.
thank you, Mr. Mayor. Real quick, Mr. City Manager, when you discuss this with the attorneys, since this is not a deposit, but an actual payment, which means payment in full, I'm assuming the band doesn't get any more money after the event is over, or do they?
That's a good question. I would have to ask Jackie if she's had that information or whether that was payment or in full. Do you have that information? Yeah.
Here's my concern. If it's payment in full, then I think the attorney would want to weigh in, especially when it comes to the gifting of public funds, because they didn't perform, even though an act of God or whatever you want to call it prohibited them from being able to perform. They still didn't perform, which means we would be giving them public funds without actually performing the service.
I'll run that over with, we can review that with the attorney. I am aware that in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and the circumstances, extraordinary circumstances, that the Attorney General's office and the Governor's office have issued an opinion interpreting the gift of public funds and allowing cities to make direct payments in support of and to compensate for economic loss from the pandemic and things like that. I'm aware of at least a couple of cities that have used their development fund balances to actually issue grants through their local chambers of commerce to local businesses. And they've done so in accordance with this interpretation of the gift of public funds. But I think it needs to be questioned here as to whether these were payments in full or deposits, and looks like Jackie is trying to bring that information up on screen and review that, and how that would then intersect with the current interpretation of gift of public funds.
So from what Jackie has on the screen, it looks like there was two big bands that I see brought up so far. One was a total cost of $25,000 with $10,000 deposit and $15,000 due before they joined the stage. And the other band was a $5,000 deposit and $5,000 right before they join, go on stage. So it sounds like there was two major bands that there was a deposit done for. So there would be additional funds needed for them to perform.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I see it on the screen now.
Just a comment, it feels like this pandemic has brought us together, brought the best out, and I feel like if we can help them because of the pandemic, it's just that much better. You know, there's murals all over our city because of it, so it just shows a lot. We could extend a helping hand.
Councilor Henry, sounds like you made a motion. Are you still want to go forward with the motion?
Yes, sir. I would like to go forward with that motion to have the city manager execute a contract.
Okay, so I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Quiet.
Okay, since I do not hear a second, the motion fails. Is there any other motions for this item? Okay, hearing no motion, we'll get more information, Mr. City Manager, and present it to a future council meeting and see if at that time we come to an agreement.
Thank you very much, sir. We'll have that to you soon.
Okay, up next we have so we have a municipal pool summer operations options. Discuss and provide direction to staff. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. This is intended as the start of a discussion. We are not yet at a point where our timelines require a decision, so we wanted to queue this up for you early enough because it involves a number of complex considerations with regard to how or under what circumstances we might be able to go forward with a pool season or what the factors in that would be. As has already been discussed tonight, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a significant impact on a variety of activities, and under the current structure and legal framework for moving forward with reopening certain sectors of the economy, municipal pools and sporting activities of this type are not allowed to resume until a jurisdiction has passed into what's called phase 3 of the 4-phase Restart Washington plan. Phase 3 still has significant restrictions on the activities that can be conducted. Specifically, public venues that reopen must open at either less than 50% capacity or fewer than 50 people on site at any given time. Social distancing is still required. Enforcement of that through the staff on hand is expected. That can only be reached after jurisdiction has passed successfully through phases 1 and 2, each of which is a minimum of 3 weeks, and each of which is dependent on the jurisdiction maintaining a declining or positive set of important epidemiological metrics for at least a sustained period of 3 weeks. Based on this, even in the best case scenario, in which we, starting back on May 5th, had been in a position to go within 3 weeks to each next phase, the earliest we'd be able to open the pool at full capacity, still with social distancing, but without the occupancy restrictions, would not be until after the 4th of July weekend. And we've determined that because of the impacts on the ability of swim teams and large groups, rentals, and so forth, we'll see a mix of impacts both on operations and on revenues. Because some operations will be cut back or maybe more limited, some of our operating expenses will go down, but at the same time, the opportunities for user revenues will go down sharply as well. We have been advised already that the cities of Richland, Wenatchee, and Ephrata have already made the decision not to open their pools, and that the cities of Toppenish and Grandview are recommending to their councils not to open, given the logistics and uncertainties. And given that our caseloads are not bending downward, but are actually increasing at this time, it does not look like we'll be able to move out of phase 1 in 3 weeks, let alone getting into phase 2 and 3. So looking at this problem and how, what are the possible pathways forward, what we've prepared for you this evening are 3 potential scenarios. One is the best case scenario, as I mentioned a moment ago, in which we were able to advance to each phase of opening within 3 weeks' time. That would put us, in the best scenario, fairly close to our normal summer mid-June opening. There would be some activities curtailed that occur before we do the formal open. For example, each year, the local school district usually reserves the pool for about a week of activities related to the end of their school year. Since the schools are shut down, they aren't doing that activity this year either, and so that would be omitted. But you'll see listed there, and I'll go through this for those who don't have it up on their screens. Under the best case scenario, we would start phase 1 on May 5th. We would start phase 2 on May 26th. Phase 2 is does not, still no public pool or public gatherings. Then in phase 3, we would reach that on June 16th. We would need to start our staffing and facilities prep about 3 weeks before. We have to buy chemicals, we have to get the pool filled, we have to get staffing identified, trained, and certified. We are running into some challenges there because most of the certification programs are not currently operating. At that time, social distancing would be required. We've had extensive conversations with the health district about how we might meet the limitations that would be in place. Most likely, it would mean the pool could only open for lap swimming in order to use the 8 lanes to achieve social distancing rather than kind of the traditional open swim that many people are familiar with. We would be able to have fewer than 50 people, which is only 1/3 of our occupancy. We would have to conduct extra sanitizing. When swim team was there, they normally bring anywhere from 150 to 160 individuals. Under phase 3, they would still be limited to only 50, less than 50, and that would include not only the swimmers, but also coaches, parents, and staff, anybody in the facility. If we then got to phase 4, it would be after the 4th of July holiday, it'd be July 7th. At that point, the capacity limitations would be lifted. We'd probably be able to take off the lap swim only restrictions, but we would still be trying to enforce 6-foot social distancing for the foreseeable future. Under this scenario, while our costs to operate the pool would decrease, our revenue as projected from our budgeting process would also decrease, and we estimate that we would need additional fund support from the general fund, which comes from city taxpayers through property taxes, retail sales tax, and utility taxes, and so forth, we'd need a slight infusion from the general fund in order to operate the pool in this way. In the second scenario, go to that, we assumed, we actually assumed just 1 3-week delay from the scenario, from the best case scenario. We assumed that we got through the phases just 3 weeks later than we are currently, than the best case, which would put us into phase 3 in July. And the same restrictions and operational considerations with phase 3 would take effect, but we wouldn't be getting there until after the 4th of July holiday. And under that scenario, we wouldn't get to phase 4 until July 28th. And a reminder, traditionally the pool closes down in August because almost all of our lifeguards are heading back to college by that point, and we don't have enough, we've not historically ever had enough staff to be able to extend much past the mid to late part of August. In that scenario, again, our costs go down. They actually go down quite a bit more. Revenues go down. It's almost a wash. We still need a little bit more out of the general fund, but it would mean basically about a 3 or 4 week pool season as folks that looks somewhat similar to what folks have experienced in the past. And I've had extensive conversations, for example, with Keith Peevely, who's the current chair of the swim team board. They are having this conversation with pools and jurisdictions, up and down the valley. They're aware of these concerns and considerations. There are parents, of course, who are concerned about exposing their children potentially to this, and others equally concerned about wanting to still give their kids a viable experience. But they're also looking at whether they will even have a viable network of pools and teams with which to compete this year, and how that might go forward, whether we go forward or not. That said, we frankly did not want to leave the council without a little bit of a silver lining option. And council is certainly aware that the pool is an aging structure. It's an incredible asset to the community, but it has been challenging to try to keep it maintained, particularly since much of the work that we'd like to do and that is necessary at this point is work that can really best and only be accomplished during the good weather months of the summer, since it's an open air facility and it's unheated. And so we asked facilities, and we'll scroll on to the next option, scenario 3. We asked facilities and recreation staff to put together essentially an a la carte menu of prioritized projects that could be accomplished this summer within the constraints of the construction orders and so forth, but that could still be accomplished to make a significant investment in the renewal and improvement and safety of the pool and its facilities and its services, so that if we were forced to cancel this year, when swimmers come back in 2021, they're coming back to a facility that is refreshed, clean, safe, and in better overall repair and condition. Probably the highest priority on there is the flooring in the facility is extremely slick, and so we have had some issues with slips and falls. Fortunately, no serious claims or injuries, but it is concerning. There are other potential improvements. The fixtures are aging and failing, from the bathroom fixtures and stalls, locking lockers installed. That menu, if the council chose to select all of those items, would still leave $50,000 reserved back to the general fund, unexpended this year, which could serve as we're trying to make sure that we're prepared for any economic impacts from the pandemic and preserving our general fund as much as possible. it's a lot of information to digest, and that's, as I said, we're not intending to try to press for a decision tonight, but wanted to initiate the conversation, get a sense of what council's interests and concerns are, and then be prepared to come back at the end of the month, potentially with any response or for a decision on this. With that, I'll invite Public Works Director and of course the Finance Director also had a lot to do with kind of preparing all this and putting this together. So if there's any questions, any of the three of us would be happy to answer.
Okay, I'll give everyone an opportunity to speak, and we'll start with Council Member Deputy Mayor Stremler.
I don't have any questions.
Councilor Farmer.
No questions at this time. I don't see us opening the pool this year, and I kind of right now lean towards the last option.
Thank you. Councilor Henry.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
I've always been a big supporter of the pool. However, I'm sure a lot of you have seen the special about Sunnyside being the hot spot, not just in Washington, but the Pacific Northwest. And I think it's important that we just completely shut it down, because we've always been in the red on this, but we do it in full capacity for the children because we don't have a lot of stuff for them to do. I just think it is in the best interest to fill the pools. Thank you.
Councilor Restucci.
I have to agree with my colleagues, Mr. Mayor, especially when you look at our neighbors. I mean, it makes no sense for us to open our pool if Toppenish is going to close theirs, because then everybody in Toppenish is going to come here, and that's going to make it even worse. So I think, unfortunately, COVID has probably closed the pool for this year.
Councilor Hicks.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. The pool, we don't need it this year. I'm leaning towards option 3. At least we can get it up to snuff and get it back on where it should be for the next year.
Councilor Broersma.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. You know, as much as my family has spent time at that pool facility in the last 17 years, if we're going to follow state guidelines, I don't see any way that we can practically open the pool this summer. And honestly, it pains me to say that, but at the same time, I'm incredibly familiar with that facility and know that it is definitely in need of some updates and improvements. All of the steps listed here in option number 3 are definitely well past due, and if we have an opportunity to do that during the summer when it's closed, we might as well take advantage of that. So I'm leaning towards that option as well.
Okay, it sounds like the bulk of council is leaning towards option number 3, and I want to thank staff for obviously putting this together for us and giving us options versus just an open or closed option. And obviously, I agree 100%. Been in the facility a couple of years ago. It's definitely needs some TLC, and having a little bit less of an expenditure back in the general fund to potentially absorb any shock that we may get later on in the year, I think will definitely be wise for us to maintain there as a potential reserve just in case something happens. So at this point, from what I heard from the majority of council is that we're gonna move forward with option 3, and if City Manager, you put something together for us in the future to approve those expenditures. I'm not sure what the process you would want us to follow on that one.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What we'll do is I'll work with our Finance Director and Public Works Director and essentially put together a public work project for us to go out and solicit the work to be done, and then any of those contracts under that would be, if anything over $7,500, those would of course be brought back to council for approval. And you probably will see if we can get all those to you by May 26th.